Why, hello there. Welcome to Double Feature Reviews. I'm Libby,
I'm David.
and today we're talking about Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio and AI, artificial intelligence. I'm not including the punctuation, excuse me. David, were you familiar with either of these films?
So I saw AI, I guess when it came out, I think.
2001?
2001, right around then. I was a big Haley Joel Osment fan at the time.
Were you excited that the main character was named David?
I didn't mind. I have identified with movies less in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
This was my first time seeing Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Who was not aware of the year of the two Pinocchios at which it came out. So I was aware of that situation in the film industry and was aware that it was considered good, but this is my first time seeing it.
The other Pinocchio being the Disney remake with Tom Hanks.
Yes. Disney's Robert Zemeckis' Pinocchio, not Netflix's Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio.
There's just so many Pinocchios.
It happened.
I had seen neither of these films. I think I may have seen the entirety of the 1940s Disney Pinocchio, but I don't think I've seen it all in one sitting. I've seen enough large chunks that I think I may have seen the whole film. But no, these were both new to me. And fun fact that I learned, one of the reasons we wanted to do these movies is because we wanted to have a diverse array of films that we talk about, and we wanted to have children's movies.
That's right.
And I thought that both of these films were children's movies. Friends, only one of them is a children's movie.
Well, I think I want to discuss that question in detail.
Okay.
But yes, I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah, AI is rated PG-13, and I would say is very comfortably sitting there. It's not on the edge of PG. If anything, it's on the edge of R.
There's very little explicit content, but it leans heavily into mature themes.
Yes. And did you read Carlo Collodi's original novel, Pinocchio?
Yes, I've read that.
Okay.
I've seen several adaptations of Pinocchio. I've seen the 1940 adaptation, and I've seen the Drew Carey TV musical Geppetto.
Okay.
Not bad, honestly. I guess I'll say I'm a fan of Geppetto.
Is Drew Carey Geppetto or Pinocchio?
Drew Carey is Geppetto.
That's the safe choice.
That's
Come
the
on,
safe
Drew.
choice. That would be bold. I've also seen some of the New Line Cinema adaptation of Pinocchio. I've seen the Robert Zemeckis Pinocchio from 2022. I've also read the short story series that AI is based on.
So what did you title the combination of these two films?
Yeah, it seemed like the right case is to go straight down the barrel here. So I went with Who Can Be a Real Boy?
You've taken my question approach from last time.
Ah, that's right. I've learned from the master.
I do not have a question this time. My title for this double feature is It's a Tough World Out There for a Doll or a Human. Drawing attention to, I think, maybe it's not unique, but it's certainly not in the original material. And it's not in every adaptation. But both of these Pinocchio stories are set in a dystopia. Like, the humans are also not having a good time.
I think the original Pinocchio story, there's a lot of humans that aren't having a good time being turned into donkeys and, often being quite cruel to each other.
Well,
but your point's
that's
fair.
their own fault. They're
That's
not in
true.
a systemic... They don't have to deal with literal Mussolini.
That's a good point.
Speaking of Mussolini, let's see if you've managed to get him specifically into the plot introductions. David, for people who haven't seen these films, there will be spoilers, but I think enough people are familiar with the Pinocchio story that you would know what's happening anyway. Give us the one sentence that you need to know for each of these.
Actually ended up doing 2 sentences for each movie.
Ooh.
This time I felt like it was necessary.
Okay.
So for Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, in this horror adaptation of the classic children's book, a grieving father in Mussolini's Italy builds a marionette son that is brought to life by a psychedelic fairy beast. The stringless marionette wanders naively between a predatory showman, the fascist youth movement, and the afterlife itself in a quest to learn what honest bravery really means.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And then for AI artificial intelligence, when a scientist develops the world's first child companion robot, David, a family with a dying son volunteers to test it. But family conflicts drive David away, through a world increasingly hostile to AI, in search of the blue fairy that turns toys into real boys.
And now a little background on exactly who was involved with these films. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is a 2022 children's, it's not animated, it's stop motion.
It is a live action film.
Live action with toys film. Directed by Guillermo del Toro and Mark Gustafson. Written by Guillermo del Toro and Patrick McHale, which I have to say we both really enjoy his Cartoon Network series Over the Garden Wall. And it stars David Bradley as Geppetto, Gregory Mann as Pinocchio and Carlo, Ewan McGregor as Sebastian J. Cricket, 100% serving Michigan J. Frog vibes with that name. And a bunch of names that you would definitely recognize in smaller roles. It seems like Guillermo really wanted this to be a star-studded affair. And also, when you're just voice acting, it's a little bit easier to get these big stars in to just read a couple lines over one day. So you will also hear Ron Perlman, John Turturro, Kate Blanchett, Tim Blake Nelson, Christoph Waltz, and Tilda Swinton. AI is a 2001 science fiction film directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Brian Aldiss, Ian Watson, and Spielberg. It stars Haley Joel Osment. Haley plays David, as we mentioned. Jude Law as Gigolo Joe, Frances O'Connor as Monica Swinton, and William Hurt as Professor Hobby. And with that knowledge, Davis, tell us a little bit more about the production of Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio.
Jim Henson approached Disney in 1985 to say, I want to do a live-action puppet version of Pinocchio.
Yes, I did see his name in the credits.
The Jim Henson Company was involved in the production of this movie. Of course, this movie was not made by Disney. That's the other Pinocchio. Disney basically said no. Jim Henson left the project. It was made as The Adventures of Pinocchio from New Line Cinema. That wasn't received particularly well. Guillermo del Toro formally became involved with the project in 2008. Guillermo apparently has been very interested in the Pinocchio story since his childhood and wanted to make a film since he was literally a child.
You can tell.
Obviously, the film has a lot of religious themes. And yes, he was raised Catholic and really did not like it very much and became a quite militant atheist afterwards. He got involved in 2008, but really struggled to find financing for a long time, over a decade. Mark Gustafson, who is the co-director, he did the Fantastic Mr. Fox movie,
yes.
Which is the other, maybe the most acclaimed...
With Wes Anderson.
Wes Anderson, yeah. Thank you. Maybe the most acclaimed stop-motion animation movie recently. And then Del Toro brought in Patrick McHale of Over the Garden Wall fame in 2017. And not long after that, Netflix bought into the project and said, here's $35 million, go make it happen. That was in 2018. So we still... took 2 more years for photography to start in January 2020, and then 2 more years for the film to actually come out. You might say this was supposed to be a Disney movie, and ironically, Disney's thinking, well, we don't want to make another version of Pinocchio. They did make another version of Pinocchio, and, well, their version didn't win the Oscar for Best Animated Feature, to put it directly.
Oops.
Yes. So the movie came out in October 2022. I'd love to tell you what its profit return on investment was, but I don't know. The film was released only in a very limited number of theaters, and so its total box office receipts are less than $100,000. But, it was the #1 movie on streaming for a long time, so that's obviously what it was made for. It was very well received. It won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature Film. It won the BAFTA for Best Animated Feature Film. It has a 96% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, a 7.6 on IMDb, which is maybe a little bit lower than you might expect considering how much critical acclaim it's gotten. So I think we would call it probably a financially successful movie, definitely a critically successful movie, but maybe not as successful with audiences in general. Maybe to jump into the film itself.
Yeah, well, I have one fun story about
please.
The production of Pinocchio, which I was going to see if you brought up and you didn't.
No.
So Kate Blanchett is in this movie. You don't hear her speak a lot. That's because she's playing the monkey, Spazzatura. Kate heard about this film, went to Guillermo, said, I'm very excited. What do you want me to play?
She's worked with him in other films before.
Yeah, put me in it somewhere. And he said, good. So I've already casted basically all of the roles. And the role that we might think of Kate Blanchett as playing had already been taken by alternate Kate Blanchett, Tilda Swinton. Tell me I'm wrong.
Couldn't be more right.
Tell me I'm wrong.
Could not be more right.
The tall, pale, regal ladies.
I would call it Ultra Kate Blanchett. I think that's maybe not alternate. It's more like more Kate Blanchett than Kate Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett is the human version of Tilda
Well
Swinton,
put.
the
Well
alien.
Or Angel? You decide.
If a fantastical being came to Earth, would we know if it was an angel or an alien? No, we would know it was Tilda Swinton.
In this movie, Tilda Swinton does play an angel, basically. So I think we're starting to hone in on it.
So Guillermo just had to say, I'm sorry, the only role I haven't cast yet is the monkey, and it's basically just going to make monkey sounds the whole time. And Kate was like, I'm in. Monkey sounds. Let's do it. So she actually did a really impressive job with the monkey sounds. I thought that they were either they were recording an actual monkey, or they had gotten a professional animal noises voice actor, but she did a great job.
Just to add on to that, typically you would be asking them to record a wide range of emotive responses, and then you'd be editing them and putting them in the right place as you did the film. But that's not what Kate Blanchett did. Kate Blanchett did it as a real voice acting role, delivering reactions to the images. This was a performance.
Beautiful. The beginning of the story, I think this concept has been used in some other adaptations, but it's not in the original and it's not universal, which is that Geppetto had another son, who I think they very interestingly named Carlo, given that the novel was written by a man named Carlo.
I never thought about that.
I was like, is that a reference?
It's got to be a
something?
reference. There's too much reference in this movie for that not to count.
Were we honoring Carlo Collodi
feel like that's
by
what we're
having
trying to do
him
here.
die?
In his purest form.
Before he got to be a grown-up and read a book?
That's right.
They should have named the cricket Carlo.
They already had too many names that were competing with this cricket. We can't overload it with content.
Yes, I believe in the novel, the cricket does not have a name.
He's called the Talking Cricket.
And Disney owns the name Jiminy, which is what most people may think of the cricket being called. But no, this is Sebastian J. Maybe the J stands for Jiminy.
I wonder what J stands for. In the sort of introductions, you sort of upstaged me slightly, but that's great. Because you said something about how you thought both of these films were going to be kids' movies, but only one of them was. Because I was going to sort of open with asking you, is this the first kids' movie that we've done on the podcast? And you've clearly said, yes, it is, which I think overall is pretty fair. I think you're right. It's not, in some ways, a traditional kids' movie. It definitely leans heavily on more mature themes. Geppetto builds Pinocchio not quite right in some ways because he's drunk, so overcome with his grief from his son that we saw exploded with a bomb in the first 5 minutes.
We don't see him exploded with a bomb.
Okay, well, we can really put the pieces together.
It's the least graphic you can make a firebombing, which is not ungraphic, but you don't see, like, chunks of flesh or a burned skin.
Sure.
That's a PG firebomb. I wouldn't call it like a 5-year-old's film.
Okay.
But I think it's a perfectly acceptable 10-year-old's film.
Okay.
In terms of, who I'd be comfortable showing it to. I think I would have liked this when I was 10.
My brother, Daniel, saw this movie in theaters. He was one of those $100,000 givers.
I don't think that's true, but okay.
Well, he paid money that added into that $100,000 of total box office.
There we go.
It was probably more than $1 for him to attend.
I thought you were saying he paid $100,000 for. I thought he was like an executive producer.
The film's box office was $100,000, and it was all for my brother Daniel. He said, "I'll take one ticket, and I'll tell you what, forget the price. Here's $100,000." That's a great story. Unfortunately, it's not true. I asked him how much of the audience was children, because, is it a children's movie? And he said it was maybe less than a typical children's movie, but there were a lot of kids in there. Probably 30 to 40% of the audience being children, which is not too far from the average for a children's movie. So I think it has been received as a children's movie. I think that's fair to say, but you don't really think there's controversies about that. It's a proper older children's film.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
One reason I think that is because it's a musical, and I think that the songs are pretty forgettable.
It's pretty bad music. I think that's fair.
Which is weird because a lot of the non-diegetic music, I think, is above average. It's very good at setting the mood. I knew exactly how I was supposed to feel in all of the scenes.
Maybe the biggest song is from Christoph Waltz. He maybe has the most extensive musical piece. I kind of enjoyed his performance. I don't think I would buy his album of Frank Sinatra covers or whatever the right comparison is there.
Yeah, I would be totally fine cutting every single song except for there are a couple of diegetic ones because Pinocchio is a is performing in a circus and
That's
he
right.
sings. And I think the inclusion of the other songs kind of lessened the impact of those.
Christoph Waltz is playing Count Volpe. That's Count Fox in Italian.
So this is the Fox character from the story.
Yeah, they're combining Fox and Mangiafuco, or Stromboli, as he is called in the Disney versions. They're combining the tricky fox and the showman character into a single bad guy who both tricks and abuses Pinocchio. The tone here is much darker than it is in the Disney movie. It's maybe somewhat closer than it is to the original novel, although it's, again, I would say maybe darker than the original novel.
Also, I don't think the Disney movie is not dark. My memory of watching it as a child is that I was scared.
Yeah, Guillermo del Toro said what made him really wanted to make this is watching the original and saying, this is a horror movie. This is not a children's movie. And I love horror movies.
Yeah, I don't like when Pinocchio turns into a donkey.
That's too much.
That's too much.
The biggest difference between this adaptation and the source material is the setting in time and in politics.
Yeah.
We are set in fascist, interwar Italy, with Benito Mussolini having already taken over the country, and that plays, when I sort of read descriptions of the movie, I thought that was just kind of the setting, and we talk about some of the themes. Oh, but no, it's very involved in the film. Mussolini appears as a character. Pinocchio goes to the fascist youth camp and gets drafted.
Toyland is a boys' military training camp in this world.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's Toyland or
That's where
Pleasure Island.
That's where... So Candlewick, Toyland is Pleasure Island.
Oh, okay, thank you.
That's where Candlewick is, and
you're right.
Candlewick is a very different character in this than in the original.
Candlewick is the son of the Podesta, the sort of military government official in charge of their town, voiced by Ron Perlman. Candlewick initially has a sort of hostile relationship with Pinocchio because the Podesta is sort of obsessed with Pinocchio being the ultimate fascist soldier because he's made of wood and very sturdy.
The Podesta has a lot of thoughts about Pinocchio, which I don't think always make sense. But that's certainly one of them. Yeah, I do think, looking at the film holistically, that I don't really get the choice to give it that setting. I think that there were a couple of scenes that, transposing them into this mid-20th century fascist setting was interesting, but at the end, it doesn't really wrap up why we were doing this. So first of all, it ends with Pinocchio's 3 friends all eventually die, and Pinocchio can't die, or is at least still alive, even though the whole point of the end is that now he's a real boy and thus can't die. So Pinocchio is still alive after his father and his monkey and his cricket have died. And he's going to venture off into the world of defeated post-war Italy and have a lovely time.
I mean, he still has a very bright future in show business as still being a walking wooden puppet. That's a spectacle. I'm not sure.
I feel like that's actually probably not a great career, even if you make a lot of money.
I suppose. Early retirement might be the right future for him. That's a good point. Yeah, I guess you're right, because, we need to introduce the other big thing going on in this particular adaptation, which is that Pinocchio straight up dies pretty early on in the movie, goes to an afterlife ruled over by a pack of black rabbits.
Who like to play poker. Rabbit skeletons.
Thank you,
They're wearing capes, but they are skellies.
So after meeting the Blue Fairy, he dies, goes to the afterlife, meets death itself, who turns out to be a sister of the Blue Fairy, who basically grants him immortality and the ability to die and respawn.
I don't think she grants it to him. I think she says you innately have this because you're animated
Okay.
by magic. You're not organic.
Okay, all right, maybe that's right.
You're Mecha, not Orga, to preview our next film.
We did it. The death character is, I think, meant to resemble the biblical angel to sort of bring it back to the religious
Yes, lots
references.
of eyes. I wanted to talk a little bit about the look and I guess we would call it production design, character design. So at first I was trying to figure out what the medium was. I thought it might be like 3D digital animation in a Pixar sort of way.
There's definitely some of that.
Yeah, but it looked sort of more like it had more mass. The characters looked, I don't know, heavier, and that's because most of them are actual physical fellas.
Originally, the fox and the showman were going to be separate characters, like it is in the normal interpretation. The puppet that was originally going to be the showman fire eater character, is in the movie as the strongman that you see when you first go there. That might be my favorite shot of the movie. You can tell that was a puppet they did clearly probably work on for years because it looks great. It looks really, really good.
So, of course, we have to point out that it's interesting that everyone is a puppet.
Right.
Even though in the story, only one person is a puppet. And I think they did it. Pinocchio moved really well. He moved in an interesting way. And I think they did have to do work to make sure that he's moving differently than the other puppets.
Yeah.
And one of the things they do is they have his legs don't attach into his pelvis the same way as human legs. They're jut out to the side, then straight down.
I see. Yeah, that's true. He is unpainted. He's sort of brown wood for the entire movie. Yeah. Unlike several of the other puppets and marionettes that we see, they had no choice but to leave him unpainted, or else you wouldn't be able to tell he was supposed to be a puppet.
Well, also, then you get to have the Christ metaphor, because
That's right.
Geppetto, as a woodworker, is constructing through joinery. He's got the pegs in the shoulders, a crucifix for the church, and that's when his first son, Carlo, dies. And Pinocchio...
It's not a subtle opening sequence, really.
Really wants you to pay attention to the theme, because he says, why does everyone like this wooden guy, but not me wooden guy?
Towards the end of the movie, he is tied to a cross and left for dead.
True.
So, and he ends up giving up his immortality, his life, to save those that he loves and that love him. We're actually really leaning into the Christ thing.
So the real moral of the story is that Jesus was never nice to monkeys. Didn't have a monkey friend to get him down off that cross.
It could have had at least one solid human life as an adventurer in a post-war society.
I'm sure Jesus would say, I couldn't be nice to the monkeys. The olive tree didn't make any olives, so I couldn't feed the monkeys. Okay, get over yourself, Jesus.
It's a fig tree.
Fig tree,
okay. I'm with you.
Well, based on, I did have something to say about Pinocchio being a Christ-like figure, which is not what the original story is about. Both this and AI are treating this character not at all like the original text. And to be fair, I don't think the original text is that good. It seems like the original Pinocchio story has a bunch of fairly disconnected random events that are quite didactic for children. And there are many cases where Pinocchio decides to have fun. He doesn't want to go to school. He wants to go to Toylands and play until he turns into a donkey. And then, you do what you want to do instead of what you're supposed to do, like listen to your parents and go to school, and then something bad happens to you. And I don't think we need a whole 2-hour movie telling children that everything they want to do is wrong. But I do think it was interesting that Pinocchio, it kind of seems to not have flaws. He's like naive. There's lots of things he doesn't know, but none of that is his fault.
I think you can see in the history of Pinocchio adaptations, there's a really strong trend towards purifying Pinocchio. In the original book, he does a lot of foolish things, no matter how we want to interpret the book. He makes a lot of clearly bad decisions. It's not even bad decisions that are based on him being naive. He's just sort of selfish and impertinent and doesn't plan ahead. And then in the 1940 adaptation, he still is a more flawed character, but he's so fundamentally good-hearted and lovable. In the newer adaptations, this one and the Zemeckis, he basically does nothing really wrong ever. He might be led astray. He often ends up providing really compelling arguments to Jiminy Cricket or Sebastian J. Cricket about why he's doing what he's doing that the audience is sort of supposed to believe. And even the nose thing, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Originally, it's like supposed to be this curse that he has that everyone knows when he's lying, which is kind of the point, that it's supposed to be, everyone will know if you lie. And basically all the new versions, that's never a bad thing. And only there's like one situation where he surprises himself by finding out that he has this power in a situation where it's actually very useful. Yes. And everyone encourages him to lie and it's kind of a joke.
He uses it to get them out of the terrible dogfish in this version. He lies so much that his nose gets long enough that they can climb out through the blowhole.
We've gone totally from trying to show that there are consequences for his bad actions being the theme to Pinocchio is a good little boy, and if everyone would just stop being nice to him, he could use his cool lying power, start being nice to him and stop being mean to him. He could use his cool lying power, which is a very different interpretation.
You never have to buy firewood again. He just lies and then you chop off the nose. I can't believe I forgot to bring this up earlier, because the most famous thing about Pinocchio is that his nose gets longer when he lies.
Yeah.
I noticed that it was brought up and presumably unintentionally, because it never gets addressed later, that in a story that we've deliberately set during World War II, I thought it was really interesting that if your nose is big, that means you're a liar, was the message here. And I was like, that is so close to Nazi propaganda that we've got to complicate that later in the film. And friends, we did not.
Pinocchio doesn't become a real boy at the end of the movie.
Yes.
He stays a puppet, and he becomes more real in that he's now a mortal puppet and will die of old age.
Huzzah.
Or maybe can die if he... Maybe as long as he's very careful and doesn't, he won't die again. I'm actually not sure what the rules are. He also does not ask anything about the rules to death, which is a bold choice on his part. But
He's got to save his dad.
I'll just read the Del Toro quote, since there is a very relevant one. He says, "To me, it's essential to counter the idea that you have to change into a flesh and blood child to be a real human. All you need to be human is to really behave like one, I have never believed that transformation should be demanded to gain love." So that obviously, A, leads back to what you're saying about some of its difference to the earlier themes, and B, eventually I think will bridge somewhat nicely into our discussion about artificial intelligence. When I read this quote, when someone says, all you need to be human is to really behave like one, this quote from someone in 2022 sounds like someone who's thinking about artificial intelligence somewhat.
I do have one point to make for Mr. Del Toro, which is that he says you don't need to change in order to earn love. Is that what he said?
I have never believed that transformation should be demanded to gain love.
Okay, Pinocchio is already loved at that point in the story. Geppetto and the cricket and the monkey all already love him.
Yeah, he earns their love by just kind of being fun to hang around for a while and being cute.
Well, he saves them from the dogfish.
That's true, but they already love him well before that. Initially, Geppetto does not like him very much. Yeah. And then he's like, he's kind of cute. Well, I do love you. So you're right, that sealed it. You just be cute.
I think this transition towards making Pinocchio a more pure and less naughty character means that we actually don't need the cricket, and he's just there as a famous archetype. So the horrible use of our Ewan McGregor in this situation.
I thought he did a great job.
But
I thought his voice acting was
horrible.
superb.
After the first 15 minutes, the only reason he's there is for it to be funny when he gets stepped on over and over and over again. The cricket is originally there as they say in the Disney movie, Pinocchio's conscience. And he's there to say, hey, Pinocchio, you're being bad and you should do what your dad said. More or less. And then for Pinocchio to ignore him. But now that Pinocchio isn't actually doing anything bad, he doesn't need this cricket.
I do kind of, again, like how he's sort of set up in the story. It's kind of heavy-handed, where he lives in the tree that Geppetto grows on the grave of his dead son?
What Geppetto's motives there were slightly unclear. His first son died because he ran back to grab the pine cone that he left in the church, and that's why the bomb falls on him,
the pine cone is what he
and
planted in the tree. That's right.
So Geppetto's like, "Fuck you, pine cone! I'm gonna plant you," and then presumably. It takes a really long time for trees to grow.
That must have been a long wait.
Geppetto does not look any older.
Yeah,
but
that's a great point.
It's been 30 years.
That has to be a long time.
Because this tree, maybe it's a magic pine cone and it grew
I think he's originally, that's a good point. I think he's originally planting the pine cone as an act of love and a symbol of his affection. But then as he dissolves into alcoholism and depression, he outlets his feelings by destroying the really, really fast-growing tree. That's a great point. Also, all the other trees around it also grew really fast, if that's true, too. So I think that, 25 years passed there, which means Geppetto is the real immortal.
Mm. And that also means that Carlo was killed from a World War I bomb drop, because World War II, you need that amount of time for the tree to grow. Out.
So it is set as an interwar movie, but it's entirely the cut where he plants the pine cone and then we see it as a full tree.
That's the interwar section.
Got it. Do you know, or do you want to guess, how old was the voice actor that played Pinocchio?
Okay. Can I get a gender? Is this a little boy or is this an adult?
That's part of what...
I'm pretty sure his name was Gregory, so I think this is a little boy, not an adult. I think he... Okay. The reason you're asking me means it's either old or young. So 11 is the wrong answer. I'm going to go with weirdly young and say he was 7.
He was 13.
How old is Haley Joel Osment in AI?
He is also 13 years old.
Is that at release? Because it
is
may
at
have been
release.
younger.
Both
So he
are
may have
both
been
of these
12.
dates are at release. So maybe both
Okay.
were maybe closer to 12. Actually, is probably a good guess.
That's the year. That's the big year, ladies and gentlemen.
Now we know. Well, on the subject of Haley Joel Osment, I guess we'll move on to AI, artificial intelligence. AI is based on a 1969 short story by Brian Aldiss called Super Toys Last All Summer Long. Story about a mother with a robot child and maybe realizing that she's going to have a real child instead, and wow, I also have this robot child. In the 1970s, Stanley Kubrick, who did not direct this movie, read the story and said, okay, I want to take this story and combine it with Pinocchio, and I'm going to make a story about a robot child who wants to become a real boy. He worked on this movie throughout the 70s and 80s. He really believed that you could not bring in a child actor to play the role. Too complex emotionally for a child. So he was like, I'll create a mechanical robot boy child.
No, Stanley.
This did not work.
No.
He was like, I'll make a cute robot child, and he did not make a
Are
cute.
you an engineer, Stanley?
He
Kubrick?
hired a lot of engineers. It wasn't because he didn't try to do it himself in the garage. He spent a lot of money trying to create a cute robot child. Turns out that cute robot child is not something that is easy to make. That is a hard thing. Hired the original writer, Brian Aldiss, to write a screenplay. He fired him and then hired like his main rival, who he hated so much, and he was really mad about it. In the 1990s, Kubrick said, hey, Steven Spielberg.
Sorry, and related to the writing.
Sure.
There were 2 more short stories by the same author published. Did those also get incorporated into the screenplay, or does the screenplay do its own thing? Okay.
They are also in some ways incorporated into the screenplay. One of those stories is sort of related to what happens with like the junk robots who are left behind. The other one is sort of related to David realizing that he is only a robot and there are many other like him at the end and having trouble with that. In the 1990s, Stanley Kubrick and Steven Spielberg were friends, colleagues. He said, hey, you're pretty good at movies. Can you produce this movie I'm trying to make about this robot child? And Spielberg said, sure. After Kubrick died, Stanley Kubrick's widow said, Steven, this is the last movie that he really wanted to make if he had more time. Will you please make this movie AI as a tribute to the great filmmaking of Stanley Kubrick? He said, well, I think I know one child actor that actually can do this. Got financing, the budget of $90 million, started photography in August of 2000. It was set to release in June of 2001. I actually want to highlight that there was something called The Beast, which was an alternate reality game that was produced to help market the project. It was one of the first alternate reality projects that were out there. As someone that has worked on alternate reality games, this is something that has inspired me, and it's maybe one of the best ones that are out there.
So this is a board game?
No, well, sort of. An alternate reality game is like a puzzle mystery game that is often produced for a particular audience, where you create fake clues and seed them in real things, and then people find the clues and start connecting them together, and you're sort of creating a story.
ARG.
ARG.
I only know it by its acronym.
Yes, sorry, ARG, that's right, an ARG. So this was like maybe the first successful ARG, and it was sort of set 100 years after the movie about like the robotics corporation trying to cover up a series of murders related to one of their robots going wrong. It was good. And they were going to turn it into a whole series of video games and stuff, and it didn't work out. But shout out to the Beast ARG, doing great work out there. So yeah, it was released in June of 2001. It opened at number 1 in the box office with $30 million. I think we have to say the movie probably wasn't actually considered a success. It made $80 million in the United States, less than its budget. It ended up grossing around the world $235 million, including $78 million, so basically the same as North America, in Japan.
I believe it.
Japanese people loved this movie. So basically $80 million in the US and Canada, $80 million in Japan, and $80 million in the rest of the world.
Okay.
So they loved it in Japan. It's a profit of $145 million, a return on their investment of 162%. So, you know, it's not a failure or anything, but this is Steven Spielberg, Stanley Kubrick. They did invest a lot of money. $90 million is a lot of money for 2000, and this did not pan out, I think, to be as big of a hit as they had hoped. And it wasn't as that well received by the critics as they had hoped. It's got a 76% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It was nominated for Best Music Score and Best Visual Effects. No prestige awards. Didn't win anything it was nominated for. Only nominated for Best Visual Effects at the BAFTAs. Didn't win anything else.
I'm not even sure I would give it nominations in those categories.
I think it's clear to say that the film has increased its reception recently. It's been on quite a few big name 100 best movies of all time lists. There are several prominent critics who have publicly said, I gave the movie a bad review at the time, but now I think it's one of the great movies of all time. Maybe in this case, we should start with the ending, because there's kind of a special production note clarification that I think needs to be done. The movie has kind of a surprising ending. It has this story about David being a robot and whether or not he can really ever love or be loved by his parents, and his time he spends doing the Pinocchio story, wandering around, trying to become a real boy. I think those are the things that you kind of could tell from the commercial, and I think there's lots to discuss there, but those go kind of about like you'd expect, really. Now, the ending is pretty surprising. I would say, maybe, do you want to tell us about what happened at the ending? Or maybe I'll give the plot outline.
Okay, starting from when?
From after he realizes he's a robot, jumps into the water to go find the blue fairy. Or dives down into the water to find the blue fairy.
Okay, so he, in the first time he dives in the water?
The second time.
Second time. Okay, so we said goodbye to Jude Law.
Amphibicopter, as they call it.
We go down in the amphibicopter. It's a submarine and a helicopter. What more could you need from a vehicle?
Porque no los dos.
Porque no los dos.
Not a car. Really not good on land and around people, as we see. So air, really high and really low. Those are your options.
Those are your options. We have arrived at Manhattan, the end of the world, which is apparently a pun.
I didn't quite follow that bit super well.
I'm interpreting that as Jude Law was having a glitch when he said that.
I didn't like that line.
So we take the amphibicopter, we being Haley Joel Osment and Teddy, his animatronic teddy bear, down. Manhattan is now mostly underwater, so we go to Coney Island, which did make me laugh when we saw the sign, because he got a glimpse of the blue fairy. So we were driving through, submarining through Coney Island.
Amphibicoptering through, please.
Excuse me. Amphibicoptering through Coney Island, and we go to a sort of like Pinocchio exhibit, I don't know, fun fair area, and there's a statue of the blue fairy. And he parks the amphibicopter, and he stares at the blue fairy, and he says, I want to be a real boy. Please make me a real boy. For about a minute, and then voiceover, which I believe we have heard before. I think we hear the voiceover at the beginning. So familiar voiceover says, and then David sat there and he kept praying to the blue fairy to be a real boy. And 2,000 years passed and the oceans froze, but he's a robot, so he didn't die. And then all humanity was dead and aliens came to Earth. And they were wandering around trying to figure out what's going on with aliens. And the main thing about aliens is that aliens think humans are so cool. Humans are the best. And the way I reconciled this was, not all aliens think humans are the best. I think this is one, like, super nerdy subset. I was a classics major in college. These are the classics majors of aliens, and they go find David, who he and Teddy have memories of humans, so they're able to like download or ask about or something, everything about humans. So they start like trying to bring humans back. You look like you want to interrupt. I'm just
going to interrupt you now. I feel like I have to.
Okay.
Because, I want you to finish.
Okay.
But they are not aliens.
Fuck this.
Yeah. So
mine is better.
I hear we're going to get into it because this is a very, very common misconception. They are robots. They are the successors of the robots that, in theory, were built by humans thousands of years ago, who have maintained a continuous living as a robot community afterwards. It's supposed to be referenced earlier in the movie Gigolo Joe. Jude Law's character says to David, humans hate us because when they are gone, we're the thing that's going to be left. So they are, in fact, the robots, not aliens.
Who are now really skinny.
So please continue.
Okay.
That's one of the things we got to clarify.
Hot damn, do they look like aliens.
They really, really look like aliens.
They have the classic alien head shape. So the aliens, robots,
yes.
Have been able to, if they find like DNA of a human, they can bring it back. But it only works for one day, because when that body falls asleep, it dies. And you can't use the DNA to make him again because of, like, cosmic memory.
Quantum.
In the atoms.
Star data.
You only get one pathway, and when you use it, it burns a candle wick. Oops, pun to the...
Oh, hello.
Pun to the last one. So David still loves mommy so much. All he wants to do is be a real boy so he can stay with mommy. And they say, well, unfortunately, we don't have any DNA. As it turns out, he has a clipping of his mom's hair because his real brother wanted to get him in trouble and said, hey, go cut some of mommy's hair in the middle of the night, and then she'll be mad. So he's got some hair. So we bring mommy back. We have one perfect day with mommy, and by perfect day, I mean she, like, gives him a mohawk. He paints some things, like Jude Law's character and some of the other weird things that he'd seen on his journeys, and she looks at him and is like, wow, that's great. And then she's like, I'm tired, and he has to say goodbye to mommy. And then he crawls into bed with her now dead corpse. It's not as disturbing as it sounds.
That is true.
It sounds very disturbing, and it's only a little bit disturbing. He crawls into bed with her dead corpse, and voiceover alien, robot, says, and then he finally dreamed...
Happiest ever.
Fade to black.
Yes. I think that's an excellent summary
Thank you.
A very involved ending. Sorry to break it to everyone, because I totally get it. They are robots, not aliens. In the story of the production of the movie, we have a big transition from it being a Stanley Kubrick movie to a Steven Spielberg movie. Stanley Kubrick definitely has a reputation as being a bit darker, edgier, weirder of a movie maker. Spielberg, he is the Mr. Family movie guy. That's definitely their reputations.
Kids love sharks.
So, this sort of hard left turn ending that you're describing here has largely been reported, including by Brian Aldiss, the author of the original story, as basically that Kubrick wrote the movie as it was up to that point, and then Spielberg added this sort of last 20 minutes that you described at the end. That is not true. Now, one thing to remember is that Brian Aldiss did not end up getting along with Stanley Kubrick, which is why he hired his number one enemy. So Brian Aldiss does not know how the movie got made. He was not involved.
So Kubrick wrote the whole thing?
Well,
or?
Ian Watson wrote the thing under Kubrick's direction.
Okay.
So Ian Watson has made it very clear that he wrote this whole thing, and he specifically said, yes, the schmaltzy ending was in the version that Kubrick gave to Spielberg. There's a Spielberg quote, what's really funny about this, all the parts of AI that people assume were Stanley's were mine, and all the parts that people accuse me of sweetening and softening and sentimentalizing were Stanley's. The teddy bear was Stanley's. The whole last 20 minutes of the movie was completely Stanley's. The first 40 minutes of the film, all the stuff in the house, was word for word from Stanley's screenplay. This was Stanley's vision. You know, I really like Stanley Kubrick as a director. I think I like this movie. I like that other really good Steven Spielberg movie about the war.
Saving Private Ryan.
Not that one, actually. Great point. Oh, wow. It's a very famous movie. It's shot in black and white.
Forrest Gump.
That's awesome. Wow, that's a great... You're really getting me on this one.
I don't know if that's Spielberg. The other good Spielberg movie is Color Purple.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about that one. I also like that one. No, I'm talking about Schindler's List. Schindler's List. So there's several good...
We are of the opinion that the only good Spielbergs are not the sci-fi stuff, but the depressing mid-century stuff.
I like this
A+ Spielberg.
You know,
Indiana Jones is mid-century, but is not depressing. That's why it's garbage. Sad.
Garbage.
Yes.
Indiana Jones is garbage. You heard it on the podcast.
Fucking tell me I'm wrong, David.
I enjoy Temple of Doom. I think it's a good movie.
You enjoy Temple of Doom? That's the worst one.
I don't think that every character in that movie is heroic, and I really admire them and think that they're great. It's a dark story.
I do have a correction to an earlier thing we said. Forrest Gump is not a Steven Spielberg movie. Do you know who directed it? We've already said his name.
Robert Zemeckis.
Yes.
But yes, that is a nice connection. I forgot to mention that.
And with Tom Hanks.
So, the ending is from Stanley Kubrick. The last comment I'll make about it, I'd love to hear any more thoughts you have, is it's a terrible ending. And if the movie had ended with David looking up at the where he whispering, please make me a real boy, please make a real boy, that would be a great ending. And would, I think, increased the movie's score by a star, so to speak. I really like the movie if it ends at the Blue Fairy.
I don't think it's a good movie, but I do want to start a little bit earlier. So I was actually going to talk about the very beginning if you didn't have a way to break into this section. But before that, I got to say, this movie, I believe you about the different sections being done by Spielberg and Kubrick. Because this movie has maybe the clearest 3-act structure
it really
of
does.
any movie that I've ever seen. There's 3 acts with extremely different pacing,
yes,
extremely different visual styles, and extremely different characters that our protagonist is interacting with. And the act 1 of the movie is one of the fastest paced things I've ever seen. And I was kind of confused about what was going to be going on because I was like, damn, we are just flying through information. And I was absorbed in it. So I had kind of forgotten that we were going to have this sort of like Pinocchio adventure out into the world section. Yeah. And it feels so insular that it's kind of hard to imagine that will happen. And that's on purpose. So I was like, we've gotten through what feels like the beginning of the film in 8 minutes. So is the rest of this movie just going to be about this mom trying to figure out what to do with her weird robot son?
Nope.
We've wrapped that up about 35 minutes in. And I think there are, I'm sure, some good things about the crazy fast pace. And given that there's so much more movie that we have to get through, I think we have to do it at that fast of a pace. It's weird that the first act is one of the fastest paced things I've ever seen, given that the third act is one of the slowest paced things I've ever seen. So if we were going to cut where he looks at the Blue Fairy...
Is that the third act? Or where's your third act there? I think it's a 3.5 act movie, with the 0.5 being the
I think there's
aliens.
Yeah, I would say that the third act starts when he gets to Manhattan and meets Dr. Hobby.
Okay.
Because that's when the visual style really strongly changes. And that's where he has his final realization.
Dr. Hobby is our Geppetto character who
Geppetto's kind of divided between Monica and Dr. Hobby. The original Geppetto, the original story's version of Geppetto, but I guess I'm thinking about Guillermo del Toro's, where the story is much more about, can Geppetto love his fake son? Yeah, but I do definitely think that we needed more time in the first act. So the first sort of 3 scenes were okay, where we establish, first scene is Dr. Hobby and his, who is in charge of some sort of tech firm, and his scientist, and he's proposing that we make, that people need love, and that we're in a dystopian world where births are limited. So we're going to make a robot that is a child robot that can love, actually feel love like a human, as opposed to other robots which can merely perform love. So that's fine. And the question of the film gets asked by one of his employees, which is, if we make this kid who genuinely loves its parents, what responsibilities do the parents and society have to this kid? And if we can't answer that question, maybe we shouldn't make this robot. That's a very interesting question. It does not get answered in the course of this film, which is why I think the ending, one of the many problems with the ending, is that it fails to answer this question. Then we establish that Monica and her husband, Henry, have a son who appears to be in like a persistent vegetative state, very ill.
He says he has a virus, as his father hints to some sort of very serious virus, and he's been put into a medical coma, I believe is the interpretation.
Okay, yeah, so he's in a
pod.
He's in a pod. I was going to say bariatric chamber, but...
something like that.
Yeah. So because they have this like tragic story of losing their son, his boss, for some reason, decides it's a good idea to give him a fake son. This seems extremely unethical, especially given that their son is not dead. So they get the trial model of David, the little boy who loves you. And at first, he's just sort of a pleasant little boy. And if you say a certain series of words while pushing a button on the back of his neck, then he imprints on you and loves you like his parents. And once he is imprinted, you can't send him back. Or if you send him back, he has to be destroyed. He can't be resent out. From that point on, when we're just sort of getting used to David being in the house, I was like, oh, this is a horror movie. Because David moves very quietly. And he walks up behind his mom all the time. And she turns around and goes, ah!
Yeah.
At one point, she tells him to, like, go play hide and seek. And then he walks in on her in the bathroom and she panics. He, like, stares at them creepily while they're eating. And then something happens off screen that we don't know anything about. And now Monica likes him and wants him to imprint.
He pretends to eat food at the dinner table, even though his plate is empty, thinking he's supposed to do that, and she's just...
No, here's what happens, and I was like, this is the most alarming thing I've ever seen. If something ever did this to me, I would absolutely throw it out of the house. He is watching them eat pasta.
Yeah.
And he's kind of miming what they're doing, eating the pasta. It's spaghetti. This is important. And she, slurps the spaghetti into her mouth, but there's a little bit dangling out of her mouth. And he starts laughing like a maniac in a terrifying way. Yeah. Both of the parents are like, ah, ha, 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 there's a little noodle coming out of her mouth.
That's comedy.
This is funny. We have bonded. I want this to be my son now. And I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's so scary. So I was like, okay, this is a story about the absolute bonkers things you do when you're in such grief about the fact that your son is dead. That's what this movie is about. That's not what this movie is about.
Then their son does come out.
Yeah, then it turns out their son is actually fine.
I think this section, and I want to hear your thoughts about it, this is the best part of the movie. This is, I think, the peak, quality-wise.
I didn't think it was great, but I do think it was the best.
Okay.
So, it's interesting to see these boys square off. And David, really does want mommy to like him and wants to be a good boy. But Martin, their actual son, keeps trying to trick him into doing bad things. And it's interesting to see Martin, who, because I think David is so creepy, I'm kind of sympathetic towards Martin. So I overall struggled with the believability of that section. And then we move into the second act, which is kind of Mad Maxy in its aesthetics. Yeah. Mad Maxy, but not desert. Oh, and that means I have to bring up something else that was weird about this movie. Is David in love with his mom? There was more than one, and in fact, more than 5 moments that were creepily romantic. And I don't think that, I
don't remember seeing that, but okay.
I don't think David actually is in love with his mom, but there were too many moments where I was like, this is a romantic interaction. These are the words that people use. If you listen to Monica's dialogue while she's setting up the imprint stuff, that is what you say at the beginning of a sex scene.
Do you mean the imprintation words, or
no? Which is melon screwdriver. No, it's what she's saying before. Okay. Is it okay if I touch you?
I see.
Is it okay if I touch your neck? Can you feel that? Does it hurt? I was like, this is weird.
Okay, that's from Stanley Kubrick's script, word for word. That's the one thing we know.
Stanley, you're a freak. Welcome to the episode where I take extremely well-loved directors and throw them under a train.
I would like Stanley, you are a freak, to be in bold, quoted letters on top of the YouTube thumbnail. Okay. And I think that's going to happen. I think we're going to do that. So
you make
got
the
it.
Thumbnail.
Plan made. Check. Please continue.
And also Indiana Jones's garbage.
Oh yeah, that'll be smaller.
Okay, that's a subtitle.
Yeah.
But also him walking in on her in the bathroom when they first get him, and he says I can't sleep, but I can lie down and be very quiet. She awkwardly leaves the room.
That is
when she's like, okay, it's boys' time now, so that her husband can undress him and put him in his pajamas, and then their windows are tinted glass, so she can still see him. So we see his shirt get taken off. and he's facing away.
Yeah.
But then he turns around to stare at her.
Well, she's sort of peeping through.
Yeah. And I was like, this
Yep.
is how you write a romance badly.
Okay.
So I didn't love kind of anything to do with that. And then we get this really emotional scene, which if you look at it in isolation is good, but the rest of the film is bad, so that brings it down. When she leaves him, she decides he is trying to protect himself from other kids, but what he effectively does is tries to drown Martin in a pool, so they have to get rid of him, which means they have to send him back to be destroyed. She's driving him there and decides that she can't let him be destroyed, so she's just going to drop him off in the woods, and he's figures out that she's leaving and he begs to go with her and like clings onto the car, but she drives away. And then, oh no, I think it might actually be before that. I think we get a little peek of the second act before that scene.
Okay.
But we end with some sort of interaction between Monica and David. And then we cut to extremely plastified Jude Law.
Yes.
Telling someone off screen how good it's going to feel to have sex with him.
Yep.
So that was just one more thing where I was like, is this about... Are they in love? Why is this the movie? So then the second act, I think, is kind of ugly, but I think it's also supposed to be kind of ugly because now David is not in his lovely, pristine, gated community with his rich parents, but he's out in the real world where everyone hates bots. And then so the second act is fine. Getting back to the ending, I agree with you that the ending doesn't work and we need to add something we can't just delete. Because
interesting.
The question that we ask at the beginning of the movie, there's two of them, is it ethical to do this? And what responsibility do we have to a child to a robot who genuinely loves a person? And if we just cut the actual ending does not answer that. I need us to find some way to answer these questions. Do you have any ideas?
Maybe we cut the opening speech. I don't think this movie is actually prepared to answer the question about what is the relationship between society and robots, and it's not that interested in exploring it. It's about David's experience.
I think that question is far more interesting than anything that happens in the movie. So I do want a movie that is about that. Maybe that's what's the new one with Alicia Vikander? It's not that new.
Ex Machina.
Ex Machina.
But yeah, I think a lot of those movies end up being about questions about class and the industrial relationship between humans and robots. And this movie is fundamentally about the emotional relationships between humans and robots. And I don't know that even Ex Machina really gets into that. But that's an interesting question. Okay.
Maybe we'll try to put it on the list. What should we pair Ex Machina with? Is it her? Maybe.
Probably.
So I do think that your strategy would make it more like a Pinocchio story.
Yes.
And in that case, what Pinocchio wants, and also what David very explicitly wants, he says what he wants over and over again in the film, is to be a real boy so that mommy can keep him. And he absolutely does not get this at the end. They give him something different and unrelated.
I think the interesting story is a story about a Pinocchio that really wants to be a real boy, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. He is convinced that if he does what is right, and if he finds the blue fairy, and if whatever, then he's going to get to become a real boy because that would only be just. He deserves to be a real boy.
It happened in the story.
And it happened in the story, and he's willing to do the steps.
He has read the story of Pinocchio in the story, in case you haven't seen
That's why he's looking for the blue fairy. He didn't just come up with the idea from nowhere. Exactly right. I think the interesting story is about someone who is convinced that if they do the right thing, they will be rewarded, but that's not true. So that's where I think if we're going to make this movie work, we're going to have to focus on that idea.
Well, I think if that movie was what existed, here's the problem I would have with it. You saying if David does what he thinks is right. What he thinks is right is to like be everything mommy wants. Why does he want this? Because he was programmed that way. I think it is unethical to do that to someone. So like when I was watching him, staring at the blue fairy saying, please make me a real boy, please make me a real boy. I was like, David has been wronged. Like,
Yes, I agree.
So if you were making this movie, would you actually just fade to black on David?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. He looks up there, we have 20 to 30 seconds, please make a boy, and we cut straight to black and roll those credits. That is exactly correct.
Do you think other people would like this movie or just you?
Yes. I think if we cut there, then it gets, at 8.1 on IMDb instead of a 7.6.
Yeah, I think it's a bold move to have the protagonist be in no way fulfilled and have no resolution.
That's what I thought in that movie theater. As I realized about 2 hour end, he was looking at the blue fairy, and I was so confident we were about to fade to black. I was like, finally, a bold movie. And then, no, we don't do that. We actually have this weird thing with robo-aliens.
We do, in fact, not actually give him what he wants.
Yeah, it doesn't actually work anyway.
We just spend another 20 minutes.
Why don't we just cut on the fairy?
Maybe not 20. Yeah, I mean, I think, if we're asking me as a philosopher, the correct thing to do is for these aliens to figure out how to, robots, to figure out how to reprogram David so that he's not still in love with a woman who's been dead for 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. That's the solution. If we want to have a happy ending.
Yeah, I bet they could do that. I bet that's within their capabilities.
They're super freaking advanced.
Yeah, that's a good point. Where it attempts to sort of engage us more there is, I think also in that opening scene, Dr. Hobby, when he's being challenged about this, says, well, didn't God create Adam in order to love him too? Mm-hmm. So I think the film is like intentionally saying society is evil. It doesn't matter if they have responsibilities. They're not going to do it. Obviously, they're in it for themselves. I think that is also a really big theme of the original short story series. And it's definitely set in this sort of hyper-capitalist, hyper-privileged world where a few people, presumably in Europe and North America, live in gated communities where everyone else is suffering.
Yeah, I think if they had sort of emphasized that theme a little bit more throughout the film, then I would be okay with just ending on the, and as it turns out, society was bad.
Yeah. So, Stanley Kubrick said he couldn't make the movie because no child actor could play such a complex emotional role. Did Haley Joel Osment prove Kubrick wrong? Is Haley Joel Osment good enough to do this role, which I think it's fair to say is a demanding role? Mm-hmm. And is that something that's special about Haley Joel Osment? Is he a cut above the cloth? Do you see that here?
Yeah, so it's hard to judge because
I'll say one thing, so sorry. Okay. HJO does not blink once in the entire film.
Well done, Haley.
That's just another fact.
I hope they got you some eye drops.
Indeed.
Why not just make robots that can blink? It probably would make it easier for a parent to love them because they're not creepy as heck.
People love blinking, and that is true.
As it turns out, people do love blinking.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this actually with Jude Law, who, I do think is a good actor, and also had an easier role and is an adult. There were several cases where I was like, what an odd thing to do, either from the script or the performance. And then it was like, oh, he's a not perfectly designed robot. That's why. So it's fine.
Yeah, he's supposed to be a slightly budget model, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I was like, why is he telling this child so much about sex? And I'm like, oh, he's a sex robot. That's like 50% of the information he can convey.
Yeah.
So I think this role is actually more forgiving in some ways because any weirdness in the performance can be chalked up to he is not a human. And it's not like there's a specific way that all robots act. So any deviation from what would be a good performance of a human is, can just be counted as the fact that he is a robot. He is this one particular type of robot who acts this way, and so it is correct for him to be acting this way.
Is this a Pinocchio adaptation? I mean, obviously there's some Pinocchio elements in there, that's clear. For example, in many lists, I believe on Wikipedia, it is not in the list of adaptations. It is in the list of related works. Do you consider AI to be a Pinocchio adaptation?
I do not. And I was there were some checklists. There's a checklist that I had for, is this a Pinocchio adaptation? One big Pinocchio element that was not included, il terribile pesce cane.
That's interesting because during the filming, there was a point where during us watching AI.
When we were on set
with Steve, us and Steve, there was a point during us watching AI where you turned to me and said, the terrible dogfish. And that's towards the end of the movie when he has dived under the water. There are some clear, being grabbed from underwater shots that are definitely intended to be a reference to that.
You gotta go inside a full ass thing where you're like, you can't live in there, but then it's actually so big that you can live in there, and then you have to, through clever trickery, come up with some way to get it to eject you.
Okay.
You can't eject yourself, is too hard. You have to use its own, it seems so scary and impossible to beat, but you just got to figure out what disadvantages does it have and use that against it. If it doesn't have that, it's not a Pinocchio story. That's the rules.
Do you have to have your nose getting longer when you lie? Because that does also not feature into the story.
I think at least some sort of punishment for lying needs to be in there. Which again, this is another Pinocchio who is perfect.
Yeah.
And is not a bad boy.
No.
So he doesn't actually need his conscience. Who is the
society
teddy bear.
thinks he's a bad boy. They think he's trying to scissor the mother. They think he's trying to drown the brother. So maybe this is a intentional playing with that roguish character, I guess.
Yeah, but then it didn't really make sense why Teddy was there, because Teddy's filling the cricket role. He does that for like maybe 15 seconds, and then Teddy's just there to have carried the hair this whole time. He's
supposed to be giving him practical advice.
Yeah, he's kind of the opposite. Like, now he's like the worldly one. He's like, here's how stuff actually works.
Yes, I agree.
Is there a fox equivalent?
Is Gigolo Joe the fox?
I guess Gigolo Joe's kind of more or Brendan Gleeson's the showman.
Brendan Gleeson's the showman, that's right. I think Gigolo Joe is the fox. He brings him unintentionally to the showman by getting captured and leading him to his capture. During the movie, you mentioned that you did not like that the currency of the future is called new bucks. Just want to point out that in the short story, which is set in Britain, their new British money is called Mondos. So I thought you'd appreciate that.
That is both better and worse. It's worse, but that just shows you what a dystopia we're in. It would have been better for the film. I don't want to. I don't want to live in the world where money is called Mondos, because that's a terrible world.
Okay.
I do want to watch a dystopian film where the money is called Mondos.
So if Gigolo Joe had said Mondos instead of new bucks, you would have been thumbs up.
I mean, I think no one would have known what he was talking about. Okay. Because they hadn't ever referred to the currency before. Okay. So he had to call it new bucks. Like, just call it bucks at that point. Like, we have shortened dollars to bucks. Why would we make it longer? Even if the official currency did become called new bucks, people would just call it bucks.
Maybe it's NUBUX or something like that. Maybe it's just a coincidence that it sounds like new bucks. That's what I got.
If that is what it says in the subtitles, I retract this statement. Right. Actually, I don't. We'd still call it bucks, BUX. Writing is a secondary language system. Speaking is the primary system. I'm an English teacher.
BUX sounds great.
Bucks. So, we will close by asking, did we watch these films in the right order? Our default is whichever was made first. This time we decided to go with Pinocchio first and AI second, just because I think we thought that Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio was a more faithful adaptation of the novel. And it's certainly more faithful than AI, but it is not a direct sequel because of the setting change. I think if you are already very familiar with Pinocchio stories, it doesn't matter. I think if you need a little refresher with what's going on in there, it's better to watch Pinocchio first than AI. Your thoughts?
I would say you should definitely watch them in this order. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is more lighthearted. It's faster paced. It's more of a daytime movie, so to speak.
I think the average pacing kind of evens out, but because the beginning of AI is so fast paced.
So yeah, I think AI is the more thoughtful movie. I mean, it's the more adult movie. During the Guillermo del Toro one, you'll be like, oh, that's kind of some interesting thoughts on the Pinocchio story. And now you'll be set up for a movie that's like, okay, yeah, let's get into this Pinocchio story.
I don't think AI is actually about Pinocchio, as we mentioned. It has some Pinocchio references. But
for Stanley Kubrick, the original title of the film was Pinocchio. And it wasn't until much later in the production that we added this other layer.
They said,
nominally,
actually, there's way too many films called Pinocchio. You got to do something else.
I think they also said, this isn't that much like Pinocchio. So, I mean, I'm not sure what movie you're making, Stanley. And he said, let's just get Steven Spielberg to do it.
Nose doesn't grow. No dogfish. Where's the Pinocchio?
I got a really, really weird ending at the end. Does that help?
Does his nose get bigger?
Sorry.
And there you have it. now we're ready to record episode 6, and David said that we needed to do a comedy. So, David, what are the 2 films? You absolutely did. Don't look at me like that. David, what are the 2 films we'll be talking about next month?
We're doing Time Bandits from 1981 and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure from 1989.